And usually a cozy means what? That's an amateur, not a professional, that there's no violence on stage, and there's no overt graphic sex, bad language, or anything like that. But the key thing for me about cozies, again, comes back to that, the attitude that permeates it. And most traditional cozies, the attitude is that the world is actually this nice place, and that evil is an aberration, and once you discover the source of the evil and excise it, the world goes back to being a nice place, and that's why they're called cozies. They're very reassuring. And I read a couple of the medieval ones, like the Brother Cadfael and that, and they really are that. And I just really had this, again, this sort of genetic reaction. Okay, the Jewish experience of European history is not cozy, and that really was, the genesis of this. And it's just, I find moments of humor, amazingly enough, but yeah, it's about that 1,000 years that no one ever talks about. People treat Jewish studies as like Moses and Hitler. That's that's it, and nothing in between. And so I guess one of the things about talking about working political ideas is that the Philomena series does take place in history. The first novel, Reagan's president. The second novel, George H.W. Bush is president. The third novel, somebody named Clinton, anyway, is president, etc. And it does date the book a little, although, what do you want? It takes place in the early 80s. She has to hunt for a phone booth at one point, right? Uses a typewriter. I think it's a coal-burning typewriter, actually. But I was doing tons of research for this all during the Bush administration, and one of the things that I did lots of research into the Inquisition, and of course I knew I had to have sort of a witch trial torture scene. I knew I had to do that. And I was reading the transcripts because the Germans kept great notes. They really had transcripts. And what really amazed me was all you had to do is replace witch with terrorist, and it could have been written today. They have all this language saying, this is the modern era, this is the 16th century, not the Middle Ages. Everyone has rights. We can't commit a crime. We can't punish someone with capital punishment without at least 2 witnesses. People have rights, except of course witches. They, are hell-bent to destroy us all. They're evil incarnate. And if you're accused of being a witch, of course we torture you until you confess. We can't let you touch us. You might, work your magic on us. So, I just want to say that the Inquisitor is Dick Cheney.
I think you're getting kind of far from the gentleman's
well, there's a lot of reactions I wanted to make here, and I've just been sitting on them. Well, the difference is that, in the Philomena series, she names Reagan specifically, and then Bush in the later ones. Whereas in here, I've just taken elements of what's going on now and transformed them so much that, I think Dick Cheney himself could read it without realizing that's him.
He would have read it if you'd said Dick Cheney and not realized it was him.
Do you have a favorite political novel?
Well, it's funny, when I thought about coming here, I wanted to name a few of the my favorite political kids novels, but I don't know if that's a particular interest or not.
Well, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the Pushcart War, it's like the most perfectly executed campaign. It's also like New York to the core. Then there's this crazy guy from England from the early 60s. It's like he anticipates the whole rise of the youth left. And he wrote these books that explain politics better than anything else I know. I read them when I was a tween. Like, he wrote Ismo and February's Road, and his name is Verne.
How do you spell that?
V-E-R-N with an E with the accent aigu on the end, and he's English. I don't know if you can even find them in print. And then I want to just say a word about my mentor, who sort of adopted me. There was I'll just, as somebody, I consider myself sort of like a journeyman writer compared to the rest of the people in this panel. I'm just sort of starting out. I had a lot of trouble self-editing, and I think one of your problems as a political writer is you go to teachers, and you don't know if they hate you for your politics or for your bad writing. And you have to develop an internal editor who tells you that, of course. Like the internal editor tells you that for you, writing about your family isn't right. And, for us, writing something else might be right. But, you find the way you write. and an internal editor. So I'm going to just name her because she's a crazy good writer. She's written for years. And only after 15 years of mentorship did she confide in me that actually the first husband that she had who died was actually the head of the Photographers Union, and he died after having a heart attack, after being blacklisted, after refusing to testify before the McCarthy Commission. And he's
Photographers Guild? The one
he was the head of, he's actually the most famous, he's the guy who was just featured in the Jewish Museum.
Photo
Yeah.
League.
What?
The Photo
Photo
League,
League.
right, the Photo
Yeah,
League.
Photo League. But
So
what is his-
Wow.
she then became a single mom and started writing for kids. Her name is Miriam Cohen. She's written for years. She doesn't get awards. I think it's because of, I don't know, I think it's censorship. She was a CP member, and then later on as a parent, she also she fought for integration. And if you look her up, her books are unbelievably, they're restrained, they're elegant, and they're so political. So
They're all children's books?
They're all children's books. I was so lucky to find her because she whammed me for the rhetoric and, and didn't get me for my politics, so.
Well, interesting. I would just say for me it would be Kim Stanley Robinson and a book called Pacific Edge, which was an explicit utopia. I like utopias, and they're hard to work out. And he's got one that's all worked out. They've even got airplanes that fly with, they're like bicycles. So
I want to just also throw in late John Le Carré, Constant Gardener and Absolute Friends. Two of the angriest political novels, leftist political novels ever written.
Wait, what's the second one?
Absolute Friends.
Yeah.
Alice in Wonderland is great.
well, let's see. What time is it?
Oh, he has a question.
Yeah, this gentleman has a question. We have 10 minutes.
Yes,
Just
please.
like extension to this question. Have any of you guys read Marcus from the Zapatistas from Chiapas? He co-wrote a novel.
Yes. Oh, I read that book.
The Mexican.
So good.
Yes. Did you
Yes.
read it? And do you think it's a
I
successful
love
experiment?
That
Right?
book. Yes.
What's the
The book is
The Empress must have it.
the book is called
I don't remember.
the
It was
Uncomfortable
4 years ago. It was published in.
The Uncomfortable Dead. Isn't that what it's called?
I think yes.
The Uncomfortable
So
Dead.
it was very successful in Mexico. It was translated in English, translated in other languages. I mean,
So Comandante Marcos and Pablo
Paco
Taibo.
Jacinto.
yes.
And they wrote alternate
Raised
chapters,
in this,
and there were alternate chapters, and then they kind of melded at the end. I suspected Taibo of writing the whole book. He denies it. He said Marcos.
Yeah, it was so flawless. I mean, from
approached him.
chapter to chapter.
Yeah.
I mean, that you couldn't
Yeah.
believe that.
He said
half of the
Marcos
chapters were
approached him.
by Taibo.
Akashic Press published it in English.
Mhm.
They may have also published it in Spanish. Somebody published it in Spanish. It's the only book I can't tell you how long that I bought in both languages so I could compare. Because obviously some of the humor did not work in English. It must have worked in Spanish. That's a wonderful book. But that has that Mexican fantasy realism thing going on.
Magical realism.
Magical realism.
Yeah.
But I love that book.
I think it's a very successful experiment, exactly that
Yeah.
genre book.
Interesting. Yes, please.
I have no idea. I don't. I've only written for myself. But you, as accomplished writers, do you find at this point that what you feel is finished is what you actually see get published, or do the publishers still change what you finally have written?
Well, I think you had that.
I mean, now that you're maybe when you start out,
Oh, I
of
see.
course they change.
Oh,
But
no,
now
they-
that you've
I
established,
haven't had anything political argued with recently. I'm not sure I ever did. Not political. I've had other things argued with, but I haven't.
aesthetic.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody has ever said to me, we can't sell that, backpedal on that. On the other hand, I don't know what would happen. I don't know how far I could push it. It would be interesting to see, but that hasn't happened to me.
Yeah, I haven't said that. I don't think that happens a lot where people change. In children's books, maybe so, because children's books actually are the most commercial these days. So maybe, but I haven't had that problem. But then science fiction, nobody cares about.
Well, I think
There's
it's
that
an
problem,
interesting point,
too, yeah, I know.
in genre literature, we can sort of say whatever we want.
Yeah.
But at the level we sell, nobody's worried about the copies that won't sell if you.
And in terms of making a living, are ebooks impacting you in any way?
Oh, this is the publishing discussion.
I know,
Get into that, but yes, they are, and in both ways, good and bad. Yeah, no, they're absolutely a force.
Yeah,
So we have
as
this-
an author, it doesn't matter what form someone
Right.
purchases
But
or
as making
but
a
for
living, it
bookstores,
does.
independent bookstores, it's hurting them.
And you had a comment, please.
Yeah, this is going back a little bit, but you mentioned the differences between fiction and nonfiction. And my agent, I write nonfiction. She always wants me to write it as if it's fiction. Strong characters and a story thread, and it gets obviously carried away in some cases, like Bob Woodward pretending he's in every room and every word and every. But how do you feel about that? Kind of connection between the two. Is it real, or is it really such a big gulf?
I know. I was looking.
No, I only asked you because you had mentioned it.
Yeah, no. For me, I get infuriated when journalism is presented as journalism, but it's clearly fiction. The Bob Woodward fly on the wall thing. If you weren't there, don't put quotes around the sentences. It makes me crazy. I think they serve different purposes. They absolutely serve different purposes, and journalists have an obligation, if you're telling us this is what happened, to tell us what happened, not what you think probably happened. Fiction writers have a whole other thing. So I understand I appreciate your dilemma, because I think it's a problem when people are asking you to give me strong characters in nonfiction, and the characters about whom the thing actually happened aren't that strong. That they're the people who were there. So
You had a question over there.
Yeah, I noticed this line of books on the wall here. You've got Ursula Le Guin there, and I just read The Dispossessed, which is a very interesting novel about anarchy and a colony on the moon and physics. You Terry had started to talk about utopia, and I wondered if you wanted to say more about your interest in utopia and dystopia.
Well, it's just an ancient form, where people would criticize society by making up, ever since More's Utopia, right? Yeah, it's just a way of reimagining the world, and then in that you put what you, it's a whole unlimited discussion. There's societies dedicated to utopia, and there's quite a bit of science fictional utopia, but there's a lot of other that's not science fiction, so I wouldn't know what to say about it, except I tend to go in that direction, I think. Because, we were asking what people's agendas are while they write, and I don't write because, I write because I want to be rich and famous, and then I write about it.
You were misinformed.
Yeah, I know. And then it turns out to be political because I am political in my life, but I don't write because I have these political ideas that I want to express. It's kind of the other way around. It works out that way, and it becomes utopian, I think, because I just like happy endings.
Just a quick comment about science fiction. I feel like it's really just been in the last few years I've discovered the real political potential of science fiction, and the way someone explained it to me a few years ago, and this is when I really started reading more science fiction, was that positing another world or something happening out in space, it allows us to create these characters who have some relation to our world, our societies, humans, but that it allows us to explore issues in kind of more to get at things in different ways.
Well, I think all fiction has a utopic impulse.
Of course,
I think what you're writing in terms of satire, there's this imagining of what kind of world you would want by looking at what is and then what isn't, and sort of hope. And I think at least in terms of relationships in your book, Bill and Lydia, Lydia's friend the cop and her, what role she played, just the idea of relationships between people that you can imagine that might not exist very easily in the real world, and you can kind of draw, and I don't know what else you feel it might have, but I think, and certainly the children's fiction, I just think that there's a utopic impulse in terms of the relationships you can imagine that might not be possible on the ground in the real world at that time. At least that's how I teach fiction.
That is
that impulse.
Yeah.
So certainly in my community college classes at Suffolk Community College, I have done some science fiction, and often, as I said, the women dread it because their experience out there in larger society of science fiction is a bunch of men shooting, ray guns at green-eyed aliens.
What's the problem?
It's just action adventure stuff that they go to because their boyfriends want to go to. And I signed Anne McCaffrey's The Ship Who Sang, and all the women were like, I never knew you could do this in science fiction. It was so different. And we once, I forget, it's been so long now, but I think, is it Ursula Le Guin's title, The Left Hand of Darkness?
Yes. Oh my God.
It makes you question, gee, what is gender? what are gender roles? So the best science fiction for me is, what is it to be human? How could we set up society differently? Yeah, certainly very.
Wasn't that this
it's not just
sort of an answer to Dostoevsky's The Possessed? I mean, I think that's part of why she wrote that.
Yeah, that's very interesting if it is. Yeah.
So she was annoyed with him the way I was annoyed with Tom Wolfe.
I don't think she liked him very much. Yeah.
Well, so I guess that's another long tradition in fiction.
Yeah.
Response fiction.
Well, listen. Oh, yes.
I just want to say, I felt like we didn't totally respond to your call, really. And I just wanted to say, I think as a left, we're in a moment where, I think fiction has this liberatory impulse to it. And I think as a left, we're in a moment where we're trying to, step into a fictional zone and, visualize another world that is possible. And it's like, and all around the world, if you believe in the collective unconscious at all, there's a connection between the act of writing fiction and the act of being a leftist, at that moment when you're trying to, create, go forward. So anyway, I wanted to step back into that for a second. But.
All right. Were you sent here to open and close this with the most intelligent comments, or is it just an accident?
Maybe I was, I don't know.